You're listening to The Jacob Valk Show. He's breaking down the latest and greatest in sports as only he can. Follow him on Twitter at RealJacobValk. Here he is, Jacob Valk.
Hello, sports fans! Welcome to another edition of the Jacob Valk Show. I am Jacob Valk, and there's some NFL news to get to. A pretty notable college football death that flew under the radar, but it shouldn't have because this guy was a pretty good college football coach. I'll also give you 5 through 8 on my NFL draft big board and my Cleveland Indians Mount Rushmore. Know this day in sports history because of the death of Jim Lambright. So I don't want to do two of the same thing. I was going to talk about Bob Turley today. I almost talked about Secretariat, but I don't know enough about horse racing to talk about Secretariat. I know that he was a dominant horse, and, you know, I've seen his Belmont Stakes, dominant performance. I get that. I just don't follow it enough to put it into context for you. It's why, quite honestly, when the Kentucky Derby happens, I'll be hard pressed to come up with something. I have some buddies that are horse racing fans, so I'll probably just repeat what they say. And even golf too. I'm not a golf fan at all. I don't know what I'm going to do for the majors. But regardless, know this day in sports history because of the death of Jim Lambright. But there is a pretty noticeable piece of NFL news when it comes to special teamers, and that is Greg LeLeg signing with the Cowboys. 3 years, $7.5 million. He gets to play with John Fossil again, a very well-respected special teams coordinator, and Zerline obviously trusts him to help him pull out of the funk that he was in last year. Greg Zerline, last year for the Rams, had one of the worst years of his career. 2018, he converted on 87.1% of his field goals and was arguably the best kicker in the league. Fast forward to last year, and he only hit 72.7% of his field goals. Also, in 2018, he hit 4 out of 6 field goal tries from 40 to 49 yards. And last year, he only hit 5 of 11 tries from 40 to 49 yards. He was not a good kicker last year. And, you know, I've said this 100 times. If you don't have a good special teams game, it's gonna affect you. There are a lot of people who think that you can just put minimal effort into special teams and it'll work itself out and you won't suffer too much because of it. There's no nice way to say it. Those people are idiots. There are countless examples of special teams mistakes costing teams games. The double doink, the miracle at the New Meadowlands, Scott Norwood wide right. Do I really need to keep going? If you don't put a legitimate effort into your special teams, you're going to suffer a great deal. There's no question about that. The Cowboys signed Zuerlein to a very reasonable contract. I do think he'll be able to sort himself out. There are some people saying that there's now a competition between Zuerlein and Kai Forbath. No. Zuerlein has that competition in the bag. Unless he misses every single one of his field goals in the preseason, Zuerlein is going to be the Cowboys kicker on opening day. Moving on now to the Ravens signing Derek Wolfe for 1 year worth up to $6 million. He's guaranteed $3 million. And I think that's a great move for the Ravens. They missed out on Michael Brockers for whatever reason. They just couldn't close the deal. They were supposedly concerned about an ankle injury of his, which is perfectly fine. You know, you can't bring guys in for medical visits. You've got to rely on outside physicians. And if an outside physician says, yeah, there's an issue here, you're going to be kind of hesitant to devote a lot of money to him. So, the Ravens pivoted. I thought they were going to look to the draft, but they went with Derek Wolfe, a guy who has been insanely underrated all throughout his career. Last year, according to Pro Football Focus, he had a 68.5 overall grade. I understand that he missed the last 4 games of the season, but when healthy, Derek Wolfe is a really, really good player. And if you put him on a defensive line with Calais Campbell and Brandon Williams, that's scary. That's a scary defensive line. It's typical Ravens. It's something they've done for years. They rebounded from not being able to finalize their contract with Michael Brockers insanely well. Moving on now to the Redskins, locking up Ronald Darby for 1 year at $4 million. And Darby did not have a good year last year, but he's had success in the past. Last year was really his first bad year. According to Pro Football Focus, last year he had a 45.9 overall grade. He was torn up basically every game. But his first 2 years with the Bills, he was really good. And then when he went to the Eagles, he had 2 really good years. Last year, he just fell off. He picked a bad time to do it because he hit free agency. He looked like he was going to be in line for a pretty big payday 12 months ago. But then, like I said, he fell off a cliff. He got hurt. And the Redskins are banking on him returning to his 2018 form. Now, they needed to sign a cornerback. All they had was Kendall Fuller and Fabian Moreau. Fuller's another bounce-back candidate. The thing with the Redskins is they're banking on Rivera to turn these guys around. Can he do it? Yes. Is it a guarantee? No. And it just concerns me a little bit when you have an offense that I actually think is going to be a lot better than people are making it out to be. I still like Haskins. I don't think you can give up on him after 1 year. This is a guy who 12 months ago I thought was the best quarterback in the draft. I'm not ready to give up on him yet. They had a home run with Terry McLaurin. They have a good running back group with Adrian Peterson, Darius Geis, assuming he can stay healthy. It's a big assumption, but he has talent. That's undeniable. And they also added Peyton Barber, who is a good backup running back. He's not a starter. You can do a lot better than him as a starter. Can he hold his own as a starter? Yeah, but no one's going to be mistaking him for John Riggins anytime soon. The running back group of Peterson, Barber, and Geis will be fine. I like the Redskins' offense. Their defense really concerns me. Ron Rivera has his work cut out for him. Moving on now to the Broncos re-signing Shelby Harris for a deal worth a maximum value of $3.25 million. He's guaranteed $2.5 million. The Broncos couldn't have done any better than bringing back Harris after seeing Derek Wolfe go to the Ravens. Actually, I'm not sure what happened first, Harris re-signing or Wolfe going to the Ravens. Regardless, I'm sure they had conversations with Wolfe beforehand, and he said that he wasn't going to re-sign. Actually, I think I saw a report that the Broncos didn't even talk to Derek Wolfe when he hit free agency. So, whatever the case may be, they preferred Harris over Wolfe. I'm not sure if I would go that far. I think Wolfe is a better player than Harris, but Shelby Harris is another very underrated player. According to Pro Football Focus, last year he had a 76.8 overall grade. He's been a wrecking ball since coming to Denver. Never reached his full potential in Oakland, was hurt in 2016, went to Denver, and has had 3 really good years. I'm kind of surprised that he didn't get a bigger deal in free agency, but he wanted a prove-it deal, and he's in line to get a lot of money next year, assuming he can keep his play up. I think he can. I like Shelby Harris a lot, and I'm extremely confident in the Broncos' future going forward. I really want to spend some time talking about Jim Lambright. And I understand that he's not a household name. He's not Don James. He's not Rick Neuheisel. He's not Gary Peterson. I get that. But Jim Lambright, for 6 seasons, was the head coach of the Washington Huskies, 93 to 98. And he had a very good career there. Even before he was head coach, he spent 23 seasons as an assistant coach at the University of Washington. That is unheard of nowadays. He loved the University of Washington. He was born in Everett and played at the University of Washington, was defensive end, was actually a pretty good player. He was all conference as a senior, and it looked like he was going to be a decent player. It never worked out for him. He ended up starting out his coaching career right after he graduated as an assistant coach at a high school in Washington, Fife High School. Then he spent a few years at Shoreline Community College, which is in Shoreline, Washington. And then he got to the Huskies, where he spent the bulk of his coaching career. He became head coach after Don James resigned in protest of sanctions that went against the university by the NCAA and the Pac-10. They got a 2-year bowl ban, they got a reduction in scholarships, and it was not a good environment there. James resigned in protest, and the university really had no choice but to elevate Lambright to head coach. And when he was defensive coordinator, he was defensive coordinator of the Huskies for 14 years. He was the guy who designed their Purple Rain defensive schemes, which were very fun defenses to watch. while they didn't have any, huge household names, they always played hard. It was really effective, and it's a big reason why Washington was so successful under James. Let me tell you something. Don James is a very underrated college football head coach. A career 175, 79, and 3 record. He's in the College Football Hall of Fame. Have you ever heard of Don James before this? I'm sure you haven't. Very, very underrated figure in the history of college football. But Lambright took over under the harshest of circumstances, and he led the Huskies to back-to-back 7-4 records. They would have made bowl games if they were eligible to. In 95, the bowl ban was over, but Napoleon Kaufman had moved on. He went into the NFL, was drafted in the first round by the Raiders, and Washington was without its best player. Damon Huard was the quarterback, and he really was not a good college quarterback until 95. It's kind of weird. Huard put together a respectable NFL career, lasted a while as a backup. He has a Super Bowl ring, but he was not a good college quarterback except for 95, when the whole offense was redesigned around him. He completed 64% of his passes for 2,415 yards. He didn't throw a lot of touchdowns, though. Only 11 touchdowns to 6 interceptions. But that is because Washington had a really good running back in Rashawn Shahi. Shahi was nowhere near as good as Kaufman, but he was really effective. Was probably a better goal line back than Kaufman ever was. Shahi was a lot more physical. Bigger player. Not by much, but still a bigger player. Shahi in 95 had 15 touchdowns. Kaufman's career high at Washington was 14. I understand there's only one touchdown difference, but still, Shahi had more. And if you ask old Huskies fans, they'll tell you that Kaufman was the better running back. It's just kind of funny how things like that work out. He also had Lawyer Malloy anchoring his defense, who's probably the best defensive player that the university has ever had. Well, second to Steve Entman. Entman was a wrecking ball at Washington. Ironically, under Lambright when he was defensive coordinator. Entman would have been a great NFL player. He was picked first overall by the Colts. He got hurt and just was made of glass. Really unfortunate. Would have been a dominant player if he had stayed healthy. That's irrelevant. The point is that Lawyer Malloy anchored a really good Huskies defense that went 7-4-1 and led Lambright to his first bowl game as head coach, the Sun Bowl, where they lost 38-18. In 1996, the Huskies decided to replace Shahi as their starting running back with a guy by the name of Corey Dillon. And even though Dillon only spent 1 year with the Huskies, he was insanely dominant. 1,555 rushing yards to go with 22 touchdowns. He led the Huskies to a 9-3 record, 7-1 in the conference. Unfortunately for them, they lost in the Holiday Bowl to Colorado by a score of 33-21. In 97, Dillon was off to the NFL, and Lambright had to alter his offense yet again. He altered the offense so it was more centered around Heward. Rashawn Shahi had more of a featured role. Maurice Shaw had more of a featured role. But the connection of Heward and Jerome Pathan led the Huskies to an 8-4 record. They had the 10th best offense in the nation when you look at points per game, and the 40th best defense in the nation when you look at opposing points per game. That was Lambright's best team as head coach, as he won the Aloha Bowl by destroying MSU 51-23. For whatever it's worth, they were also ranked as high as second in the nation that year. The highest ranking they had had since 1992, Don James's last year. In 98, the Huskies took a step back. Brock Heward did his best, but he was never really a great college quarterback. He was okay. He wasn't anything special. There were no big weapons on offense to help him, and the Huskies limped to a 6-6 record, and they got slaughtered in the Oahu Classic by Air Force 45-25. After that, Lambright was fired, was replaced by Rick Neuheisel, and Neuheisel was a better coach than Lambright. But the thing is, they both only won one bowl game at the university. And it is very possible that if Lambright's teams weren't banned from being in bowl games his first 2 years, that he would have won more. Jim Lambright is an insanely underrated figure when you look at 1990s college football. Very underrated head coach when you look at the history of Huskies football. And he died yesterday from dementia at the age of 77. May he rest in peace. Alright, now it's time for me to tell you who numbers 5 through 8 are on my 2020 NFL Draft Big Board. They are Derek Brown, Jerry Jeudy, Tua Tagovailoa, and Tristan Wirfs. Brown is the prototypical defensive line prospect, except when you look at his production. Last year, he only had 50 tackles and 4 sacks. He had a tendency to take some plays off. You got the sense that he just gave up on the play a little too easily. He didn't use his toughness and his instincts as well as he could have. But this kid has all the talent in the world. Reminds me a little bit of Myles Garrett in that respect. And I think Derek Brown is going to be a wrecking ball, assuming that his head coach, whoever it is, can get his head screwed on straight. In the last 2 years, you'd be hard-pressed to find a better wide receiver in all of college football than Jerry Jeudy. This guy has been insane. He reminds me so much of Amari Cooper. It's not even funny. I understand that it's lazy to compare him to a guy from the same school, but he just reminds me a lot of Cooper. Great hands, great speed, great route running ability, and can get a lot of yards after the catch. The thing with Jeudy is, and it's nothing against him, I've said this before, this is a wide receiver draft class that is historically stacked. According to ESPN, there are 16 wide receivers in the top 100 prospects in this draft. That's insane. That and running back are the two deepest positions in this draft. If you're a GM with multiple holes, you've got to say to yourself, do I want to take a guy in Judy and fill my other holes with lesser prospects? Or do I want to fill my other holes now and wait a little bit to take a wide receiver like a Michael Pittman, a Laviska Shenault, or a Denzel Mims? Guys who should be getting a lot more attention than they are. It's a very, very tricky situation. I think Judy is going to slip in this draft. Not out of the first round, but it wouldn't surprise me if he slipped out of the top 10. It really, really wouldn't. And certainly guys like CeeDee Lamb, Henry Ruggs, and Justin Jefferson can slide too. Again, nothing against them, it's just they happen to come out in an incredibly stacked wide receiver draft class. Tua, we all know the story, would have been the first overall pick this year if he had stayed healthy. I understand that Joe Burrow had a historic year, but when you look at Tua's total body of work, if he had stayed healthy, how could you pass on him? Reminds me a lot of Steve Young when I watch him play. I hate to put that on him, but there's a reason that 12 months ago the Dolphins were tanking for Tua. Now it seems like they're going to get him at 5. That scares me as a Jets fan. I'll tell you right now, I do not want to have to face Tua and Josh Allen 4 times a year. And all I have is Sam Darnold. You know, I'll tell you, I think Darnold is going to be a worse quarterback than Josh Allen and a worse quarterback than Tua going forward. I just don't think that the Jets have put him in a good position to succeed. I understand that's not what we're talking about. It's just I'm thinking about my chat with Dominic that I'm going to do later today, and man, I just am really pessimistic about the Jets. Hopefully he'll be able to provide me with some optimism. I want to be optimistic about him. They're my team. That's the main reason why I wanted to talk to him. I'm really pessimistic about the Jets. I want another perspective on things. Tristan Wirfs is a jack-of-all-trades, master of none. He's an incredibly safe pick. If you wanted to put a guy like Mekhi Becton, Jedrick Willis Jr., or Andrew Thomas ahead of Wirfs, you can. I wouldn't hate it too much. They certainly have arguably a higher ceiling than Wirfs, but I just think that when you look at offensive line prospects, you shouldn't shoot for the moon. That's how you end up with Tony Mandarich, Luke Jokel, and Greg Robinson. Wirfs does need to improve his pass blocking, and I'd like him to be a little bit more of a mauler. He's not as tough as I'd like him to be. I like my offensive linemen to be the type of guys to back me up in a bar fight. Now, certainly Wirfs has the size to do that, 6'5", 320 pounds, but he just doesn't have that killer instinct that I look for in offensive linemen. Having said that, though, he is a fantastic prospect. Reminds me a lot of Lane Johnson. They're both super athletic, and they're really similar in size. Wirfs, 6'5", 320. Johnson, 6'6", 317. And Mekhi Becton is in that range also, another crazy athletic offensive linemen. I'll get into it a little bit more when I do 9 through 12 on my big board, but Becton reminds me of a much, much, much better George Fant. A rich man's George Fant, I think is the best way to say it. You've heard of a poor man's insert player here? Well, Becton is a rich man's George Fant. Alright, it's time for another Mount Rushmore. This one is on the Cleveland Indians, and it's kind of funny. Last week I told you that I did top 5 New York Yankees for school. In that same assignment, someone else did top 5 Cleveland Indians of the 1990s. And I don't remember exactly what his list was, but it was a good list. He put some thought into it. And those Indians teams of the 90s were really fun teams. Manny, Jim Thome, Mo Vaughn, Charles Nagy. They even had Oral Hershiser at the end of his career. They were just easy teams to root for. They could just never get over the hump. I'm still not sure how they lost to the Marlins in 97. Then again, I'm not sure how the Yankees lost to them in 03. It's funny, I was watching the Aaron Boone game the other day because I'm so desperate for sports. I'm actually recording old sporting events. Tonight, ESPN, Chiefs-Rams, that huge offensive shootout that they had a couple years ago. I'm going to watch it. I'll tell you that right now. But back to the Indians, their correct Mount Rushmore is Bob Feller, Nap Lajoie, Jim Thome, and Bob Lemon. If you really need me to tell you about Bob Feller, then really, from the bottom of my heart, shame on you. From the late 30s to early 50s, there was no one in baseball more dominant as a pitcher than Rapid Robert. And that's despite the fact that he missed 3 years serving in World War II. It's funny, I once went to a dinner with a bunch of baseball legends, and I'm eating something in my own world, and my father says, "Jacob." I turn, and he says, "Come over here." So, I walk over to him, and he says, "You want to meet a war hero?" "Sure." "Okay, here's Bob Feller." And I'm telling you, I almost dropped my plate. He looked nothing like the Feller that you see in the pictures. But really nice guy. We had a great conversation. He's a war hero, no question about it. But he was also an insanely dominant pitcher. If he's not number 1 on your list of best Indians ever, shame on you. As good as Nap Lajoie was, and I did a This Day in Sports History on Lajoie, if you want to listen to it, it was the February 7th episode. That's the day that he died, February 7th, 1959. You can learn more about Lajoie by listening to that episode, but Lajoie just wasn't as dominant as Bob Feller. Jim Thome was probably the best player on those old 90s Indians teams. He leads the Indians in home runs, and it's not even close. Thome has the most with 337. Albert Bell is second with 242. It's funny, when we think of the best sluggers in baseball history, does Jim Thome ever come up in that conversation? This is a guy who was never accused of steroids and hit 612 home runs. I don't know how he was only a 5-time All-Star. He's, without question, one of the best sluggers in baseball history. Not even close. Bob Lemon, Yankee fans may know him as a former manager, a multiple-time former manager, but He was a really good Indians pitcher, has a World Series, won in 48 along with Feller. Third in wins with 207 and tied for fourth in strikeouts with 1,277. I had to put Lemon ahead of guys like Mel Harder, Sam McDowell, Corey Kluber, and Early Wynn. He also won a World Series with the Yankees in 1978 and won the pennant in 1981. So he gets extra points in my book there. Tomorrow, you're going to get the chat that I did with Dominic Arbolino. This isn't even an interview. This is just a chat between two really good friends. It's probably going to get heated. I'll tell you that right now. You're not going to want to miss it. I promise you that. Until tomorrow, I am Jacob Valk saying that Tommy Lasorda's curveball had as much hang time on it as a Ray Guy punt.